Good morning, colleagues and friends. For those of us who are not used to make sermons in cathedrals, this is a very hard room to speak. We try to do our best, but if somewhere in the room you have difficulty in understanding and in hearing what we say up here, please indicate so we can try to improve. This particular session is on the social dimension of higher education. The main idea of today's conference is to contribute to the Bologna process, to contribute ideas, stimuli to the process in the next couple of years. The organizers have been inviting students and faculty from all across the European higher education area to suggest their contributions, and we have made a selection of those. And in this first session, this morning, I'm very pleased to announce the contributions by Brink and John Storen. Chris has worked in 3 different societies, in England, in Australia, and in South Africa, where he's from. So he is not just used to and familiar with relations to societies in one particular case, but in a multiple way. Apart from that, he is a logician, and from what I know and what I have read, he applies his sense of logic to his thinking on the relations between university and society. So a very good reason to look forward to his contribution. The second contribution will be by John Storen, and his role in this context is in the field of widening participation. He is one of the key figures in the Bologna advisory group on the social dimension of higher education. And widening participation, both for generational students and in terms of lifelong learning, are in his focus all along. We will have 2 30-minute introductions by the 2 speakers, and then we will have another 30 minutes for questions and answers after the second of the introductions. Some of us think that higher education is anyway useful to society and useful in terms of socially beneficial. Yet, if you look into it, you are led to question, are we really serving all of society? Are we really serving not just the most powerful voices in society, but those with a weak voice as well? And I hope that at the end of this particular session, we've gotten answers to this question and to the question how to do this best. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Chris Brink. Chris, we're looking forward.
Thank you, Seibold, for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As you can see, I have three things that I want to say. I'm also a mathematician. I can only count up to 3. So that's the totality of what I have to say. But before I do that, let me give you some context. I think that about our academic work, there are 2 fundamental questions. And the first question is this: what are we good at? And every rector at this meeting, every professor at this meeting, every academic, we're very good, very practiced at saying, what are we good at? Any one of us can reel off a list of accomplishments, and every university can do that. But there's a second question. The second question is, what are we good for? And we are much less practiced at responding to that question. In fact, it still often seems to catch us by surprise. And of course, this question is about our role in society, and it's about the social dimensions of our work. So my 3 observations, my 3 theses, are in the context of the second question: what are we good for? And my first thesis, my first observation, goes back to the time I worked in South Africa at the University of Stellenbosch. This is Stellenbosch. It is, as you can see, it's very beautiful. The university is those white buildings on the left. It's very popular with tourists. It's in the wine region of the Cape, and it seems altogether idyllic. And yet, there is something else about Stellenbosch worth knowing. This is where the policy of apartheid was born, at Stellenbosch University in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. For most of the 20th century, Stellenbosch University was the intellectual home of the apartheid regime. Most of the apartheid figures were closely connected with Stellenbosch. You might have heard of a man called Hendrik Verwoerd. He was the architect of Grand Apartheid. He was a professor of sociology at Stellenbosch before he went into politics. His predecessor, a man called D.F. Malan, won the election in 1948 that instituted the apartheid regime. When I bought a house in Stellenbosch, D.F. Malan's house was just across the road. When Verwoerd was assassinated, his successor, John Foster, became chancellor of the university, and so did Foster's successor, P.W. Botha. I was appointed as rector in 2001. I was working in Australia, as Seibold had mentioned. And when I went to Stellenbosch, I was the first ever person to be appointed as rector from outside the university. I was the first ever rector who had not been an alumnus, and I was the first ever rector who had never been a member of the secret organization behind the apartheid regime called the Afrikaner Broederbond. So apartheid started in 1948 and lasted until 1994, and these are the laws of apartheid. I took this photograph in the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg a few months ago, and most of the apartheid institutions that you might have heard about are on that display. So there's the Bantu Education Act, which quite deliberately instituted a system of inferior education for black people, the legacy of which is still with us today. There's the Group Areas Act, which said that black people should live apart from white people. And there is the Extension of University Education Act, which took all the black students out of the white universities. So, under those laws, South Africa looked like that. Those colored bits were the so-called homelands or Bantustans in which the black people were supposed to live, and then they would go to the white areas are all the rest of it, to work, and then go back to the homelands. And each of those little colored bits would be an independent country, according to ethnic and tribal groupings. And so there would be an independent country for the AmaZulu, an independent country for the AmaXhosa, a country for the Botswana, the Bavenda, and so on and so forth. And each of these independent countries would have a university. And so there would be a university for Zulu speakers and Xhosa speakers and Tswana speakers and Venda speakers and so on and so forth. And that would serve what was then 80% of the population. And so in this way, the idea was that a very diverse country with a very diverse population would have a very diverse higher education system. And now you might want to ask yourself, is that really diversity if you have a map like that? And that depends on what you think diversity looks like. And I'll show you what I think diversity looks like. It looks like that. Now, you may or may not have seen that. It's a little candy sweet called Smarties. These are the Smarties, and they come in many colors. So diversity looks like that and not like this. If you imagine that inside this little box, there were smaller boxes, and you put all the yellow Smarties in one small box and all the red Smarties in another box and so on, then you would still have the same Smarties. But you would have destroyed something. You would have destroyed the diversity. So when I went to Stellenbosch, which had been for decades a university for Afrikaans-speaking white people, the Afrikaners, I thought I'd better say something about diversity. And I took up office on the 1st of January 2002. And there's a very nice tradition there that the academic year begins with an academic procession and a speech by the rector. The academic year is the same as the calendar year because this is the Southern Hemisphere. And so within weeks of taking up office, I made my keynote, my inaugural address at Stellenbosch. And this is what I said. I said, up front, this university needs more diversity. And then you can give a motivation for that, which is a moral imperative. It needs to be done. You could even give a political motivation for it, but I gave an educational motivation. I said, the business of a university is about knowledge. Our business is to learn. Whether you're a professor or a student, our business is to learn. And we will learn more from those people, those ideas, and those phenomena that we do not know, that we are not familiar with, than from the safe environment that we know only too well. So if we want to be a good university, if we want to be a better university, we must maximize the opportunities to learn. And to do that, we need the diversity of people and ideas around us. And that became the keynote, the tenure of my rectorate for the next few years. So this gives me my first thesis. The first thing I wanted to say is this. In my view, quality needs diversity. If everything around you is white, you will not have the opportunity to see the other colors and not learn from them. Just note that I'm saying diversity is necessary for quality. I'm not saying diversity is sufficient for quality. That's the logician in me coming out. So, quality needs diversity. For my second thesis, since we are here in this wonderful historic city, Bologna La Dotta, I'll take you back into European history. And I'll take you back about 750 years to something called the Condemnations of 1277. On the 7th of March, 1277, the Bishop of Paris, that's him, his name was Stephen Tempier, he issued a condemnation of 219 Aristotelian propositions. Now, you might remember, it was in that time, in the 12th and the 13th century, that Aristotle became known in Western Europe via Spain, via Muslim Spain, because the Muslim scholars long ago had translated Aristotle into Arabic, and that's how it eventually traveled via North Africa, via Spain, into France, for example, into the University of Paris. And the bishop thought this was a conflict between faith and reason. And all this logic, all this investigation of natural phenomena, all these questions being asked were endangering faith. But the bishop had overreached himself, because while he was condemning people like Sigurd van Brabant and Boethius of Dacia, Averroes was a Muslim scholar who was the commentator on Aristotle, he also condemned propositions formulated by Thomas Aquinas, who was, of course, the renowned angelic doctor of the church. And Aquinas eventually gave a reconciliation of faith and reason, and that became infused into the university ethos, the use of reason. This became the soul, the essence of a university. So over time, over the next few hundred years, a university was seen as a place for the pursuit of truth and the exercise of reason. And this was formulated by Immanuel Kant in 1798, when he said of the 4 faculties of the university, you remember there was the undergraduate faculty of the arts and philosophy, and then the 3 postgraduate faculties, law and medicine and theology. He said the 3 postgraduate faculties might do the bidding of the state or of the church, but the undergraduate faculty must stand for the interests of the sciences and with reason speaking publicly. So that, in a sense, that was the understanding that I grew up with as well as an academic. But then we decided that the exercise of reason takes place through 2 things, research and teaching. And we have our own patron saints. That's Wilhelm von Humboldt, and that's John Henry Newman. And that's what we're good at. This is what we do. And I will come back to that research and teaching as what we're good at understanding. But in my lifetime, in our own time, we made a Faustian bargain. This is Dr. Faustus, and he's talking to Mephistopheles. And we made our own bargain. We traded reason for excellence. And that's excellence with a quotation mark behind it. There's a certain view of excellence. Somehow, we came to believe that what we do is competitive. Somehow we came to believe that what we do is like the Olympics. It's about running faster, jumping higher, outperforming our colleagues. So that kind of excellence looks like this. And every rector would have seen this and studied it. It's the criteria on which your university is ranked. And no longer does it look like this. It's no longer about thinking. it's about outputs. Now let me draw out the consequences of this change from reason to excellence by saying something about a cliché. So I'm going to use a cliché to make a point. And the cliché is about the knowledge economy. That's Francis Bacon, who said knowledge is power, and that's Adam Smith, who wrote the first textbook on economics. And if you put knowledge and economics together, you get the knowledge economy. Now, suppose we take that seriously, that cliché, and we say, all right, if there is a knowledge economy and if we play a role in it, what are the drivers of supply and demand? In that economic dispensation, what's the supply side and what's the demand side? And the Adam Smith argument, of course, is in an economic dispensation, supply and demand are regulated by an invisible hand. And we have our own version of that. We say, if we only do our research and our teaching well, then that's our job done. The invisible hand will see to it that in the end that is of benefit to society. And that is true. It will. It does. But it is not the whole truth. There's more to it than that, because excellence as we construe it is a matter of outputs, and so it's still all stuck on the supply side. And the what are we good at question is a supply side response. And my question is, what is the role, our role, on the demand side? How do we respond to the needs and demands of society? But my second thesis is simply this. Because excellence is only on the supply side, we miss an entire dimension, and therefore excellence is not enough. I don't care how good your university is. I don't care where you are in the rankings. That is wonderful, and I would congratulate you, but it is not enough. There's a different dimension to our role in society. It's the what are we good for question. I'll now move to my third thesis. And for my third thesis, I'll take you to where I live. I live behind that mountain. And the reservoir of water in front, that's the Theewaterskloof Dam. That's the main supply of water for the city of Cape Town. Now, you may know that we almost ran out of water. It was very, very close. Cape Town almost became the first major city where the taps just went dry. And that's because 2 years after that photograph was taken, the Theewaterskloof Dam looked like that. There was no water left. So we all had very severe water restrictions. You must only shower for less than 2 minutes and not more than once a day and not on Sundays. You had to reuse all your grey water. It was a crisis. And here's my question. In that crisis, where were the universities? There are 4 universities around Cape Town. 3 of them have an Institute for Water Research. In the entire crisis, the institutes of water research of our universities were not at the forefront. Why is that? If we have all these experts, and if there is a crisis, why is it so difficult for us to respond to societal challenges? Whether it is water, or whether it is poverty, or whether it is access, there are plenty of societal challenges. Why is it so difficult for us to respond? Your university very likely has a portfolio for research, a portfolio for teaching, and perhaps a third portfolio that you might call outreach or societal engagement or community work, or perhaps even third strand. Now, in that portfolio, do you just go out and give offer what you've got, or do you actually respond to the needs around you? Of all the challenges facing society, globally, nationally, locally, how do you match your knowledge base and your expertise with those challenges? If you make a list of all the global challenges and you then focus in on which of those challenges are particularly relevant in your own city and in your own region, do you interact with the community around you on their basis rather than on your own? So do you shape and direct your research and teaching to respond to those challenges? For example, this has been mentioned a couple of times in this conference already, and there's a separate session on it. Does your university or your institute, do you have a portfolio where you can respond directly to the question, how do you respond to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And you might respond only to some or only to one. That is not the point. The point is, do you do it? Or do you respond to local challenges? Here are some books about that topic. Can I draw your attention to something called University Social Responsibility? It's by analogy with corporate social responsibility. There's in fact a very active network called the University Social Responsibility Network. There's their logo. There's also one in North America, the International Consortium for Higher Education, Democracy and Social Responsibility. In fact, Sjoerd Bergen is in another hall as we speak, also addressing some of these topics. The books in the middle came out of Newcastle University. That was my colleague John Goddard. This is my own book that Sybold kindly mentioned. This was the Civic University Commission. The tone of my tenure at Newcastle was about the civic university, the way in which the university interacts with society. So my third thesis is about responsiveness, and it is this. Your exercise of social responsibility isn't about what you want to give, it's about what society needs. Responsibility requires responsiveness. Now I'm going to conclude by again taking you back to 1277. You may have seen that one of the people whose propositions were condemned was a man called Boethius of Dacia. He was from Denmark or Sweden or Scandinavia. And he wrote a lovely little treatise called De Summa Bono, on the supreme good. What are we here on earth to do? And this is what he said. He said, the supreme good open to man is to know the truth, to do the good, and to take delight in both. And for me, that to know the truth, this is our what are we good at portfolio. This is the supply side. This is curiosity-driven research. This is our exercise of reason, the pursuit of truth. But to do the good, that is to respond to the demand side. That is to respond to the social dimensions of higher education. That is to respond to the question of what are we good for. And then I think we can all just try and also look at the last part. When we do those things, we can take delight in both. Thank you very much.